I need you to buckle up, because what I'm about to say sounds so wild, so unbelievable, so absolutely horrible, that even Hollywood scriptwriters would reject it for being too much. What if I told you that 50 Cent is allegedly sitting on footage so explosive, so nuclear, that it didn't even make it into the first documentary about Sean Combs? What if Doc 2 isn't just a sequel, but a detonation? We're talking secret claims, hidden stories, allegations that were supposedly too much for Netflix. And now 50 is hinting that he might drop everything online. No filters, no corporate edits, no mercy. Why would he do that? Is this revenge? Is this strategy? Or is this a calculated public takedown years in the making? Because according to insiders, yes, 8 insiders, what didn't make the first documentary could change everything about how you see the hip-hop empire built in the 90s. And if even half of these rumors are true, this isn't just industry drama. This is legacy ending. So the real question is, are you ready for what's coming next? Everybody thought the first documentary was the explosion. Everybody thought that was the moment the curtain got pulled back. But now the conversation has shifted from what was shown to what was left out. And that is where things start getting uncomfortable. Because when 50 Cent started hinting that there was more footage, more interviews, more claims that never made the final cut about Sean Combs, the tone changed immediately. This wasn't just industry gossip anymore. This wasn't just trolling on Instagram. This became a chess match. You see, the rivalry between these two has never really been subtle. For years, 50 has taken shots publicly, strategically, and sometimes comedically. He's built a brand around calculated mockery. But this documentary era feels different. It feels organized. It feels intentional. It feels less like jokes and more like narrative control. And that's what makes people nervous. Because documentaries aren't diss tracks. They aren't tweets. They aren't quick jabs in comment sections. They shape perception. They frame history. They influence how future audiences understand an entire era of hip-hop. And when someone with 50's reach says, "There's more," that statement carries weight. Now let's step back for a second. Sean Combs has been one of the most powerful figures in hip-hop for decades. From music mogul to fashion entrepreneur to liquor partnerships, he built an empire that extended far beyond beats and lyrics. His name became synonymous with luxury, influence, and exclusivity. White parties, celebrity circles, access that most artists could only dream about. And that kind of power doesn't just disappear overnight, but over the past year, headlines have shifted. Lawsuits, federal investigations, civil complaints, public scrutiny. Whether proven or not, the perception around him has changed dramatically. And in moments like this, perception can be just as powerful as verdicts. Enter 50 Cent. Some people say he saw an opportunity. Others say he saw justice. Some say this is personal. Some say it's business. But what can't be denied is timing. The documentary didn't drop in a vacuum. It dropped when public interest was already at a boiling point. And here's where things get interesting. According to 50, certain claims were excluded because of time constraints. That's the official explanation. Too much material. Too many stories. Too many interviews. But critics immediately asked, in a streaming era where series can run multiple seasons, what exactly was considered too much? Was it repetition, legal risk, or content that crossed into territory producers weren't ready to navigate? That ambiguity is fueling speculation, because when you tell an audience something was removed, their imagination does the rest. Suddenly, social media fills in blanks with theories. Commentators begin connecting dots. Old interviews resurface. Former associates start talking. Not necessarily with evidence, but with opinions. And opinions. Yes, in today's digital world, travel faster than facts. There's also the undeniable history between 50 and Diddy that adds emotional context. This isn't two strangers. This is years of subtle digs, competitive tension, and clashing personalities. 50 has often portrayed himself as someone who doesn't forget slights. He frames his actions as strategic retaliation, not random attacks. And fans are split. One side sees him as exposing what others were too afraid to address. The other side sees him as capitalizing on controversy for content and clicks. Both narratives are loud. Both narratives are gaining traction. Then there's the industry silence. You notice how certain names that were once frequently associated with Diddy aren't speaking publicly right now. Not necessarily defending. Not necessarily condemning. Just quiet. And silence, especially in celebrity culture, becomes its own storyline. Because people start asking, why aren't they saying anything? And once that question starts trending, it snowballs. At the same time, commentators like Gene Deal and others who were once close to that world have begun giving interviews, sharing their perspectives, revisiting old memories. Some claim ideas were borrowed. Some question omissions. Some hint that the real story hasn't even begun. Are those interviews coordinated? Are they independent? Or are they simply people seizing a moment when the spotlight is hot? That's where the tension builds. Because if Doc 2 becomes a reality, it won't just be a sequel. It will be interpreted as escalation. It will be framed as round 2 in a public war. And in a digital age where narratives can permanently alter legacies, escalation matters. But here's the twist nobody talks about enough. What if this isn't just about past grudges? What if it's about positioning for the future? Streaming deals, production companies, media ownership. 50 has quietly built his own entertainment empire. He understands storytelling power. He knows controversy converts into viewership, and viewership converts into leverage. So when he teases more footage, it's not just gossip, it's marketing psychology. And whether you support him or question his motives, you can't deny he understands how to keep audiences watching. The question now isn't whether more content exists. The question is what happens if it drops. And that building tension is exactly where this story continues. Because once the idea of unreleased footage entered the conversation, and the speculation machine went into overdrive, suddenly every live stream, every podcast, every former associate with a microphone had something to say. Not necessarily evidence, not necessarily proof, but opinions. And in today's media climate, opinions travel just as fast as headlines. The rumor mill started churning with claims that the original documentary barely scratched the surface. Anonymous insiders began hinting that there were interviews that never aired, that certain stories were legally sensitive, that some narratives were trimmed not because they lacked impact, but because they carried too much of it. Now, let's be clear, none of these claims have been officially verified, but that hasn't stopped the conversation from growing. It's because when 50 Cent casually mentions the possibility of releasing additional content independently, maybe online, maybe outside of traditional platforms, it changes the dynamic. It removes gatekeepers. It removes network oversight. It suggests raw, unfiltered storytelling. And that idea alone is enough to make people nervous. Supporters of Sean Combs argue that this is strategic timing. They say 50 is capitalizing on legal headlines and public scrutiny to push his own media ventures forward. They frame it as opportunistic, a calculated branding move disguised as accountability. Critics of Diddy, on the other hand, see it differently. They argue that powerful figures rarely face sustained public examination unless someone persistent keeps the spotlight on them. In their eyes, 50 isn't stirring chaos. He's forcing transparency. But here's where it gets complicated. The hip-hop industry has always operated on layers: public personas, private realities, carefully curated narratives, lavish events that look glamorous from the outside but remain mysterious on the inside. For decades, certain gatherings, certain parties, certain inner circles have been whispered about but rarely dissected in mainstream formats. And documentaries, by design, give structure to whispers. So when viewers noticed that some aspects of Diddy's career were covered broadly but not deeply, questions surfaced. Why were certain chapters brief? Why were some relationships only mentioned in passing? Why did specific controversies feel summarized instead of explored? Were those editorial decisions purely creative, or were they influenced by legal considerations? Again, speculation. But powerful speculation. Meanwhile, financial analysts and entertainment journalists have pointed out another layer: brand damage control. Major corporations tied to celebrities monitor public perception closely. When headlines turn negative, partnerships reassess risk. Investors evaluate exposure. Streaming platforms analyze backlash. In that environment, a second wave of explosive content isn't just entertainment. It's a business event. Imagine this scenario. Doc 2 drops independently. It trends immediately. Social media explodes with clipped sound bites and viral reactions. Sponsors associated with past ventures begin receiving questions. Old collaborators are asked for comment. Suddenly, silence becomes harder to maintain. Would that create legal consequences? Not necessarily. But reputational pressure can shift alliances faster than lawsuits. And then there's the psychological warfare aspect. 50 has mastered digital trolling. He understands meme culture. He knows how to provoke without directly accusing. Often, he'll post a cryptic caption, a laughing emoji, a vague hint. And the internet does the rest. The ambiguity fuels engagement. So when he suggests there's more to the story, he doesn't need to detail it. The suggestion alone becomes content. Industry veterans have begun debating whether this is personal revenge or long-term strategy. Some insiders claim the tension goes deeper than fans realize. They reference old competitive dynamics from the early 2000s. Power struggles, label politics, social circles that overlapped in uncomfortable ways. Again, none of this is new, but timing amplifies everything. Because the current legal climate surrounding Diddy has already created uncertainty. Civil suits and federal investigations, as publicly reported, have shifted his image from untouchable mogul to embattled executive. Regardless of outcome, the optics matter. So, what happens if additional allegations, even framed as commentary, enter the mainstream again? Public trust erodes incrementally. Every new conversation chips away at legacy. Even if nothing is proven in court, the cultural narrative evolves. That's the true battlefield here. Not just legality. Legacy. Some media critics have also raised an interesting question. What responsibility does a rival hold when producing content about someone they've feuded with for years? Can a documentary be objective when the executive producer has a personal history with the subject? And supporters say bias is inevitable in storytelling, and audiences are smart enough to interpret perspective. Detractors argue that personal grudges can shape editing choices subtly but powerfully. And hovering over all of this is the internet's appetite for drama. Let's be honest. Viewership spikes when controversy trends. Algorithms reward engagement. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. A calm, balanced documentary rarely goes viral. But a teaser implying hidden secrets? That's click gold. That's why the mere possibility of Doc 2 feels explosive. Not because of confirmed facts, but because of the ecosystem it would enter. Imagine influencers dissecting every frame. TikTok breakdowns analyzing body language. Twitter threads connecting unrelated interviews from years ago. YouTube commentators constructing timelines. Reddit forums compiling theories. Once the content is out there, control disappears. And perhaps that's the real power play. If 50 releases additional footage independently, he bypasses traditional media filters. He owns the narrative. He sets the tone. He frames the questions. Whether audiences agree or disagree, he dictates the conversation cycle. Meanwhile, Diddy's camp remains relatively reserved publicly. focusing on legal responses rather than social media sparring. That contrast itself becomes part of the storyline. One side loud and teasing, the other side controlled and procedural. Which approach resonates more with the public? That depends on who you ask. But here's something that shouldn't be ignored. Hip-hop has always thrived on rivalry. Competitive energy built the genre. Diss tracks, lyrical battles, public feuds, they're woven into its DNA. However, documentaries elevate rivalry from entertainment to historical record. They freeze moments in time and present them as context. So if Doc 2 happens, it won't just be a new episode in a feud. It will be archived, quoted, referenced years from now when people study this era. That realization raises the stakes, because once something enters the historical narrative, it becomes harder to separate perception from fact. And as the speculation intensifies, one thing is undeniable. This isn't slowing down. The interviews are increasing. Commentators are choosing sides. View counts are rising. And the tension that started as a rivalry is evolving into something much bigger. Something that doesn't just question one man's reputation, but challenges how power, influence, and storytelling intersect in modern hip-hop. And if the pressure keeps building the way it has been, the fallout won't just affect two individuals. It could ripple across the entire industry. And that ripple is exactly where this story heads next. Because once a narrative reaches this level of intensity, it stops being just about two men and starts becoming about systems. Influence, power structures, the machinery behind celebrity empires. If Doc 2 actually materializes, the fallout won't unfold in one dramatic explosion. It will happen in waves. First wave, public reaction. Clips will circulate instantly. Comment sections will divide into digital battlegrounds. One side declaring this the long-awaited reckoning, the other accusing 50 of orchestrating a media ambush. Old interviews will resurface. The past quotes will be replayed out of context and dissected like forensic evidence. And in the middle of that storm, brands will quietly assess risk. Major corporations tied to entertainment figures don't operate on emotion. They operate on optics and liability. If a second documentary reignites scrutiny, boardrooms start asking cautious questions. Investors request updates. Legal teams evaluate exposure. Even without a courtroom verdict, perception alone can influence partnerships. That's how reputational crises spread. Not always through convictions, but through hesitation. Then comes the second wave, legal chess. Now let's stay grounded here. Hypothetical content doesn't automatically equal lawsuits. But if any new material introduces claims that push boundaries, attorneys on both sides would likely analyze every frame. Cease and desist letters become possibilities. Public statements become carefully worded. Every sentence is measured. Because in high-profile conflicts, silence can be strategic. But so can response. If Diddy's team chooses to counter publicly, it reframes the battle. It shifts it from insinuation to confrontation. And once confrontation becomes official, media outlets escalate coverage. Headlines multiply. Cable news segments debate ethics. Industry veterans weigh in. Suddenly, what began as rivalry commentary transforms into a cultural flashpoint. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Audiences often treat documentaries as definitive. They absorb tone and editing as implied validation. Even when disclaimers exist, storytelling shapes belief. That's why legacy becomes fragile in moments like this. For decades, Sean Combs built an image of mogul excellence. Fashion lines, music catalogs, entrepreneurial ambition. He symbolized elevation from street hustle to corporate boardrooms. That arc inspired countless artists. If Doc 2 reintroduces unresolved questions, that inspirational narrative competes with controversy. At the same time, 50 Cent stands at a different crossroads. He's no longer just the rapper who survived industry beef. He's a television producer, a businessman, a storyteller shaping crime dramas and documentaries. His credibility as a media architect matters. So, this isn't just personal, it's professional. If audiences perceive him as exploiting turmoil for clicks, that could impact future partnerships. But if viewers see him as exposing uncomfortable truths, his reputation as a fearless producer strengthens. That duality is the gamble. And then there's the third wave, industry distancing. We've already seen how quickly public alliances can fade when controversy intensifies. Invitations dry up. Collaborations stall. Social media interactions decrease. Not necessarily out of guilt, often out of self-preservation. Celebrities operate in ecosystems. When one node destabilizes, adjacent nodes protect themselves. If Doc 2 fuels renewed scrutiny, former collaborators might release generic statements emphasizing due process. Others may remain silent entirely, and that silence will be interpreted differently depending on who's watching. Because in a hyper-connected culture, absence becomes commentary. Meanwhile, younger artists observe all of this carefully. They're watching how power can shift, how quickly dominance can feel uncertain, how storytelling can redefine public perception. It's a masterclass in modern fame. But let's zoom out even further. This entire saga highlights a larger transformation in media itself. Once upon a time, narratives were controlled by major networks and print publications. Now, a single producer with an online platform can ignite global conversation. That decentralization changes everything. If 50 bypasses traditional distributors and releases additional content independently, it reinforces a new model. Creator-controlled exposure. Direct-to-audience controversy. No editorial buffer. And once that precedent is normalized, other rivalries may follow suit. Imagine a future where every major industry dispute becomes a streaming series, where personal grievances are packaged as investigative entertainment, like where the line between accountability and spectacle grows thinner. We're already halfway there, and the public appetite for behind-the-scenes truth only accelerates that shift. Of course, there's another possibility. Doc 2 never drops. The tease remains marketing. The ambiguity sustains interest indefinitely, because sometimes the promise of revelation generates more engagement than revelation itself. Mystery sustains momentum. Speculation keeps algorithms fed. And unresolved tension keeps audiences refreshing timelines. If that's the strategy, it's brilliant in its simplicity. Keep them wondering, keep them guessing, keep them debating. But if the footage does surface and if it amplifies already volatile headlines, the consequences extend beyond two names. Record labels may revisit internal policies. Streaming platforms may refine vetting processes. Executives may reconsider how much unchecked power any single figure should hold, not because one documentary dictates morality, but because public pressure reshapes risk tolerance. And here's the most fascinating layer of all. Hip-hop has always celebrated dominance. The biggest house, the flashiest party, the most powerful connections. But this moment forces a different conversation. What happens when dominance is questioned? What happens when legacy meets litigation? What happens when rivals become documentarians? We're watching that unfold in real time, and no matter which side you lean toward, you can't deny the cultural significance. This isn't just gossip. It's a case study in how influence operates in the digital age. It's a reminder that narratives are fragile. And it's proof that in 2026, the most powerful weapon isn't always a diss track. It's a documentary. Now, the only remaining question is whether this tension culminates in closure or escalation. Because if escalation wins, this won't be remembered as just another celebrity feud. It will be remembered as the moment storytelling itself became the battleground. And if that battleground expands any further, the aftershocks won't stay confined to one rivalry. They'll echo across an entire industry that once believed its power structures were untouchable. But in a world where cameras never truly turn off and rivals control production budgets, Untouchable is just another word for temporary. And temporary power is the most dangerous kind of all. So now I have to ask you, what do you think is really going on here? Is 50 Cent about to drop something that completely reshapes how we look at Sean Combs and that entire era of hip-hop? Or is this the most strategic rollout we've ever witnessed? Controversy as content, tension as marketing, silence as fuel. Because one thing is clear, this story isn't fading, it's building. And the moment more footage drops, if it drops, the internet is going to explode. But I want to hear from you. Is this accountability? Is this revenge? Is this genius-level media chess? Or is it all just smoke with no fire behind it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't hold back. If you made it this far, you already know we break down the stories nobody else wants to touch. So hit like if you want the full truth, subscribe if you're ready for what's next, and turn on notifications. Because if Doc 2 moves even 1 inch, you'll hear it here first.